The 2015 Colorado legislative session officially opened this week with Speaker of the House Dickie Hullinghorst and Senate President Bill Cadman at the helms. The session began with speeches calling for unity and cooperation, but many of the bills offered in the first week were far from bipartisan. Ed, we're going to change format a little bit and start with you as our Capitol Hill reporter. You've been there. You just came from the Capitol. You'll probably be going back later today. What can you report from the first week at the Capitol?
Well, the first week at the Capitol shows that and every session begins with the platitudes of crossing the aisle and working together, and there were those again. But even as those are being said, it became clear that these are two parties coming from two very different places this year as well. And I think that's actually not a horrible thing. It's not a partisan thing. It's showing that there are different ideologies at play, and this is a session with the Republicans leading the Senate and the Democrats leading the House, where we're going to find out if there can be middle ground between the two ideologies, which I think is a heck of a lot better chance here than there is in Washington, D.C. You saw Republicans coming out saying, first of all, very loud and clear, the issue is moot about whether or not people are going to get Tabor refunds this year. So, I mean, that seemed to be the biggest foot stomp I saw of the day, saying that we do not want people messing with our oil and gas resources, saying that we want to cut regulations in the state. You saw Democrats coming out and saying, look, we want to help the middle class. We want to do more to train workers. We want to do more to cut people's debt and educational debt. These are very different ideas. The oil and gas resources was most apparent in the two House speeches, in fact, where Brian Del Grosso said, essentially, leave your hands off oil, and Dickie Hullinghorst said, we need to do something to stop these fights over drilling. I think it sets up a session that could go one of two ways. You could either see absolutely nothing pass, things get out of the Senate, they die in the House, vice versa, and I think that's very possible. That is a lot what we saw in the 2012 session when roles were reversed and Republicans had the House and Democrats had the Senate. But I think there is also so many issues coming up right now. There is at least a popular sentiment on. I think the debt issue is one where Republicans are going to have to find some way to say, okay, let's talk about if there's anything we can do. I think that the issue of construction defects is popular enough now that Democratic leaders who've said we have no interest in reducing people's right to a trial are going to have to come to the table and listen. We're going to find out in 120 days, but I think it is going to be a very debate-filled session, the likes of which we haven't seen in quite a few years.
Alicia, even though I think a lot of the most partisan wings of the party are going to make the most headlines and news, they're going to be louder and so crazy bills on the right or the left, the power seems to be, with only one vote difference in the Senate and 3 votes in the House, the moderates who can maybe wiggle one way or the other are really going to have the power. Do you think that will bring forth more moderation from both places, because really the moderates are going to be the ones calling the shots?
And I think in some ways it has a little bit already, and I might argue a little bit with the premise of the question, because while there have been some bills and some positions taken on the edges, there's also Bill Cadman, Senate President Bill Cadman's bill on Tabor refunds and funneling them more toward the middle class, which has attracted a diverse body of supporters. There are workforce development measures that are out there that seems to be a consensus issue. There's also K-12 funding, restoring K-12 funding. We had Democratic leaders and Republican leaders in the last week to talk to us about their priorities into the editorial board, and there was a lot of overlap between them. I mean, there are differences, and frankly, by the end of the session, they could be at each other's throats as they get into deeper discussions. But at the outset, I think there is a lot of agreement, and I think there is a realization that the margins are thin, and the only way to get anything done is to compromise.
Patty, with the way it's structured so far, do you think John Hickenlooper is going to have to do a lot of maintaining, making sure this doesn't get to my desk, or is that going to get weeded out because of how close everything is right now?
Oh, I think he's going to have a much better time this time than certainly 2 years ago, because it will get weeded out more before it gets to him. And he's going to be able to focus on some of the moderate positions, the economic building, the getting people jobs who have fallen out of the workforce. He'll be able to focus on things that those moderates in both sides of the party can agree on. And in fact, he has already put forth his first position, which is to get people who've been out of work, unemployed for more than 6 months, back to work, which is a great position, because even though Colorado's unemployment, I think, fell last time to 4.1, It's that low partly because people have just given up. And I think to try to get people working again while Colorado's economy is looking up and to find places for them, try to figure out what's going to happen with Tabor, what we can do to build the infrastructure, help the middle class, really solidify the gains Colorado has made over the last few years. I think that'll be the focus. So there will be some people actually getting things done on that level in the legislature, and you would hope in the governor's office. And yeah, we're going to have some crackpot bills too, because we've seen plenty of them already emerge, but we'll be able to make fun of them at this table. So it's a win-win for us.
It really is a win-win. It's a good point. Amy, in full disclosure, your husband is a state senator now, a former sheriff of Weld County, John Cooke. You don't have to divulge any of his impressions from the first week, but what have your first impressions of this week have been?
Well, first of all, I think everybody at this table will probably be surprised to know who he is co-sponsoring a bill, somebody out of the House, and it is a Democrat, and they are working together on a victim's right bill. So you know what? Somebody reached out to him, and so you will see that bipartisan agreement. And I'll tell you what, I also think, going back to what Ed said, both parties look and want to be the champion of the middle class. It's how do you do it? So you have the Republicans saying, listen, if we have less regulations, you have small business that then will be able to employ more people. Whereas, for instance, Morgan Carroll saying, and this going back to both of their speeches, Bill Cadman and Morgan Carroll's speeches on opening day, Morgan Carroll saying, well, we, XYZ programs, this is what we want to do to help the middle class. It's how are you going to get there? I happen to think divided government is good government. It does force, it forces more moderate and reasonable voices. And the person who will be most thankful for all of that will be John Hickenlooper.
I definitely agree with that.